I want to share with you a story about a woman named Bonnie. That's not her real name. But Bonnie was sitting in my office, sitting in front of me. She had an appointment. She had called the synagogue about conversion. Nothing about her, we didn't know. I probably get 12 calls a year from people just out of the blue who are considering conversion. So she was in my office. My assistant Lisa had set up the appointment, and they come in. I have no idea their story. And everyone's different. Sometimes these are people in their 20s, sometimes in their 40s. Sometimes, by the way, they have a serious Jewish boyfriend or girlfriend already. And other times, by the way, they're single and they just want to pursue Judaism. I just recently, and it happens occasionally, a woman who's divorced with 3 kids, and she wants now to pursue Judaism. Her husband wasn't Jewish, her kids are not Jewish, and her youngest one is going to be going through conversion with her. Everyone is a unique story, but Bonnie, not her real name, was sitting in front of me, and so before we could even talk, she said, "Rabbi, I just have to ask you a question before we start." Said, "You know, I have a coworker, and when I told him I was thinking about converting to Judaism, this coworker said to me, you know, if you're not born Jewish, you can't ever really be Jewish." Whew. I looked into Bonnie's eyes. I could see the pain of her question. She shared with me how through growing up and even through college that some of her best experiences were with Jewish friends that she had. She told me that actually that most of the men she had dated were Jewish because she just felt more comfortable with them. She very much wanted to consider becoming Jewish, but not if people wouldn't consider her Jewish. Not if Jews wouldn't consider her. It's not the first time I've heard this question. I'm going to tell you about once a year. I get this question from a Jew by choice, and some of you I see who actually became Jew by choice nodding your head in recognition of that comment and question. Like Bonnie, for someone considering conversion to Judaism, the quest for Jewish identity frames the question of what it means to be Jewish, right? What does it mean to be Jewish? But for most Jews who are not born Jewish, and for whom Jewish identity is an assumption rather than a journey, the question is very different. It's so funny, I'm looking out at you and recognizing so many people who became Jews by choice and who have enriched our community. The question I want to ask is, so what does it mean to be Jewish? One element of what it means to be Jewish, to be part of a Jewish community, would you agree with that? And I think that's what draws many non-Jews to want to be part of the Jewish people, is that sense of community, of relationship, of families, and to the larger whole. Their first interaction with things Jewish is not about kashrut, it's not about prayer, it's about community moments, right, in which they feel something special going on. Almost 20 years ago, political scientist Robert Putnam, some of you may have read a book that he wrote called Bowling Alone. And what he talked about was that in America, you can see the shift from activities like bowling leagues, some of you may be old enough to remember them, and other group activities that now people do on their own. Right? Urban sprawl and suburbs have drawn people away from town squares and from a sense of community, and so people now bowl alone. Right? That's the infirmity. We yearn for a sense of community. We do, and yet we find it in fewer and fewer places. The truth is, community is not just being around lots of people. Right? You can be sometimes in a stadium with 100,000 people and not feel that you're part of a community at all. Especially, by the way, if you're rooting for the other team. But if you are a Dodgers fan, right, attending a game at Dodger Stadium, Hazan Mimi, right, it can be considered a communal experience. But what is the community value? The Dodgers, they used to be a good team. Well, this may be a fun community to be part of. In the end, is it related to the values of how you live your life? You've heard me say many times That just because the West Valley, and in particular Calabasas, has lots of Jewish people, that it does not make it a Jewish community. It just makes it a place with a lot of Jews. It's a sense of belonging and the common purpose that come from a Jewish community. It's so much more powerful. It has the power of purpose. It has a sustaining power to be able to create relationship that's just different from a gathering of people. Just look at our history, and you'll see that Judaism and the Jewish people survived because of the strong concept of community. I want to take you back to the 6th century BCE. The Babylonians, they conquer Judea, and they take away a great segment of the population to Babylonia into exile. Now remember, all they have to connect them to their purpose of Israelites is their sacrifices, their temple. And now in Babylonia, they have nothing. Will they survive without that sacred relationship? What do? They gather together, and they call the place that they gather a Beit Knesset. Today, what we call a synagogue. Beit Knesset means a house of gathering. They gathered together, and they read from a document. They read from a scroll that talked about their sacred ancestors and a covenant that they had with God. And it talked about the relationship and guidelines of what it meant to be Jewish. And that document, you might have guessed, evolved and became our Torah. Without that document, without gathering, I don't think that community would have survived 50 years to come back and rebuild the temple. You see, you have to have your sacred center. Without that, a community will stop being a community. And then 600 years later, in the year 70, the destruction of the Second Temple, with the concept of a Beit Knesset, that synagogue, the rabbis add the idea of a Minyan. Many of you know what a Minyan is. That you need 10 people in order to have a complete community. Without those 10 people, you cannot read Torah in public. You can't read some of our most important prayers. You can't recite the mourner's Kaddish. You can't mourn. Because no one should mourn without a community. It gives context. You see, that's how we've survived. It's a sense of connection to the sacred. Last year, United Synagogue, the organization of conservative synagogues, it's the organization that binds us all together, they set out to consider a change in bylaws to allow people who are not Jewish to be members, who are related to Jewish people in the congregation. And that sounds to you like nothing special, because we've been doing it at Temple Aliyah for 20 years, acknowledging this. But United Synagogue, until a couple years ago, did not permit it in its bylaws. And I was vice chair of a national commission because they knew the work that we had done here. We changed the bylaws. But in doing so, we focused on two different concepts. The idea of community and the idea of covenant. It was new language to think about relationship. So what's community? Community is the feeling of connectedness to an extended group. It's the feeling that there are people who are there to celebrate the good times and to be there in the difficult times. It's the feeling that you're not alone. Covenant, on the other hand, is a sense of purpose felt by each individual of the community that gives that community the sense of who it is. It's this sense of purpose that allows community to sustain itself from one generation to another. Without that sense of purpose, you won't sustain the sense of community. When you are part of a covenant, you believe that your actions make a difference. By the way, our life cycles create that context. So, for example, a Brit Milah, right, the circumcision or the baby naming of a girl, it's not just the celebration of the beauty of life, is it? What do? We enter them into the covenant. Brit Milah or Brit Habat. See, it's the beginning of that relationship where we try and bind them and try and understand that that's the purpose we now endow into this little thing that doesn't understand it yet. And then later, for bar and bat mitzvah, it's not just a celebration of adolescence. By the way, if it's a celebration of adolescence, we'd probably just lock them in a closet. Right? Just take them out occasionally, maybe, if they're nice. But what do? We put them in front of a Torah, that sacred document that's about covenant, And we remind them that they're part of that covenant and that you now have to step up into it and understand it a little bit more. But do most bar mitzvah understand that concept? No. But we hope they'll grow into it. Community will make you feel good about what you are doing. That community will do that. But covenant gives your life purpose. That's how you get defined. Many of you are probably here today for that sense of Jewish community. For some of you, it will be an important sense of being part of the Jewish people, a reminder that the Jewish soul that nurtures you. But the question we have to ask is, do you feel covenanted? You see, here at Temple Aliyah, I think we do a great job of community. Right? When you walk in here, you're going to feel part of a community. When you walk into Shabbat services, you will feel welcomed, even if you are a stranger walking in. If you've dealt with difficult issues in life, if you have had a loss, if you've had an illness in your family, you've probably felt our community of caring reach out to you. See, that's what community is about, and we're good at that. What I'd love us to be able to do even better is to feel that sense of covenant, to feel the sense of the holy purpose of what we're doing. See, the Hebrew word for covenant is brit. It came to symbolize the essence of what it means to be Jewish, namely that we're a covenanted people. So I want to explore two of the britot, of the covenants that we have in the Torah. There's a number of them. I want to start first with Abraham and the Brit Milah. And so God tells him that you will circumcise yourself, by the way, 99 years old. Now, if that's not commitment, I don't know what is. All right? You're going to become a great and mighty nation. That's what God tells him. We're going to establish a covenant of purpose with you. And Abraham, he has to understand what that means. His name has changed. Some of you may know or may not that Abraham's first name was Avram and Sarah's first name was Sarai. And it was when they received and became part of the covenant and understood that their names were changed to Avraham and Sarah, each added of the letter He to symbolize God. You see, that covenant became the very essence of their name and who they were. So what did Abraham do, by the way? Did he do anything in particular? I want to remind you of the beginning of the story of Abraham. And God comes to him and says, I want you to go. Go from your homeland of Ur. I want you to go to a place. I'm not going to tell you where yet. You're just going. Right? He didn't know what the plains of Canaan looked like. He didn't even have a son. And God says, I'm going to make you a mighty and great nation. Can you imagine the faith that took on Abraham? You see, he believed in that covenant. Only later did God formalize it through the Brit Milah. The second Brit I want to talk about, covenant, is at Mount Sinai. Most of you know this one. The Israelites who gather together, it's 400 years after Abraham, and they're brought together at Mount Sinai with more of what the covenant is about, the laws. It's about doing. That's what the laws represent. If you want any proof, how many laws are there, mitzvot, in the Torah, according to the rabbis? 613. You don't think that speaks about doing? It's not just about feeling. It's about doing. And so they are at Mount Sinai, and they are called together. And what does it mean to be part of that Jewish covenant? How do you connect to that idea of covenant? Do you feel covenanted, really? For some, it's Shabbat, holidays, kashrut. It's got to be the act of doing. And then it's up to us to go out in the world and make a difference, as we always have. But here's what I tell you that's really important to know. I believe the Jews, separated for that sense of purpose, will stop making the difference we have in the world. I have no question about that. And by the way, 2 generations from now, I don't know what we'll look like if we lose that sense of being covenanted. We're a community that's different from a social or athletic club because we live our lives through the values of doing and sharing. When the Israelites gathered at Mount Sinai, what did they say in response to the receiving of the covenant? They said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do. The primacy there. First they said, we will do, and then they said, we will listen. It's about doing. And according to one midrash, or rabbinic tradition, each person at Mount Sinai understood that covenant and heard it differently. What does that mean? It means that it had to speak to the individual. that each person had to hear and feel it was calling to them. When we become part of the covenant, we've chosen blessings. We've chosen covenant. We've chosen meaningful life. It's that higher power that sustains us as individuals made in the image of God and the ability to bring godliness into the world. Whereas community is about belonging, covenant is about doing. In the Torah, the word for community is edah. That's how they refer to community over and over. Edah also, if you look in the dictionary, will mean testimony. Moradina, you know this, right? Edut, to give testimony. If you're ever at a Jewish wedding and you sign the ketubah, you are an aid. So what's the relationship between community and testimony? A real community gives testimony to God. We testify to some purpose that we have. That's why the word edah is used for community and for testimony. We're bound together, our hearts, our souls, in a common purpose. Rabbi David Wolpe wrote, quote, "A true edah, a congregation, is bound by love in pursuit of something higher than themselves. The connection is more powerful and lasting than fear. The survival of Jews is often foolishly attributed to being hate or fear." Some of you actually believe that. Many groups, though, he says, have been hated throughout history, and they are gone. The Jewish people survives because we are animated by the highest ideals and bound together by love. From its earliest days, Israel has been far more than a camp. We are a congregation. So some of you may ask, if you don't believe in God, if I don't believe in God, can I be part of the covenant? And I say yes. I know many people who have tenuous ideas about God, some who even reject the idea of God. But when you're connected to a community and you take on the sense of obligation and destiny with that community and understand that there's a sacred purpose of that community, then yes, I believe that you can be part of it and say Na'aseh v'nishma, but you have to do. You see, some people are just in the community as riders, by the way, right? They just are on for the ride. The people who define community are the ones that do. That's how you create community. People who do. And without those doers, community will pass away. Last week, we read from the Torah portion, Nitzavim. And it says this, some of you may know this section. You stand this day, I want you to listen to the repetition. You stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your tribal chiefs, your elders, your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from wood chopper to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of the Lord your God. Moses is sharing this on the last day of his life. 40 years of wandering into the wilderness, right? 40 years, he's at the limit, at the border with Israel, about to go in. And he knows they have to re-accept the covenant. Because if this group of people doesn't accept the covenant before they go into land, Moses knows they'll never survive. So they accept this covenant. But why do we have this language of everybody? The wives, the water drawers, the children, everybody. Rabbinic tradition tells us to emphasize the individual. That each person counted. And they had to affirm that as well. You know, at Mount Sinai, when God spoke, he spoke in the singular second person. He addressed the commandments to you, not in, I guess, in Texas. Where's Jonathan, right? In Texas, how would you say the plural you? Y'all. God didn't say that at Mount Sinai, did he? He didn't say y'all are going to observe Shabbat. He didn't say y'all are going to observe and honor your parents. He didn't say y'all, he didn't. He said you. It wasn't a community, he was speaking to each individual. See, Moses is speaking to the individuals as they go into the land. See, my friends, Moses is speaking to you. He's speaking to me. He's calling us from thousands of years ago to enter into this covenant. The question is whether we hear it and whether we're going to say, Seve Eshma, I will do and I will listen. See, that's what has to happen today. Right? Isn't it easy to be distracted from covenant? So many things going on in our lives. You have hockey games and football games. You've got basketball. You've got theater. You've got running. We got everything. What about covenant? Sometimes we just don't have a sense of obligation. Isn't that a dirty word sometimes in our world? Nothing should be obligated. That's what covenant is. A sense of relationship and obligation and destiny that is shared. You see, during the high holy days, the vast number of our prayers are in the plural. We're part of a community, but I want to tell you that there has to be a moment in which you stand as an individual, in which you say, here I am, Hineni. At 7, Shema, I will do, I will hear. At the end, right, Moses calls them all together. And he speaks to them and he says, right, he says, you all stand here this day, not just those here, but also those not here. I already told you he called everybody there. He called the women, he called the drawbearer, he called everybody. Who wasn't there? You. See, I mean it. The rabbi said that Moses was talking about the future generations. Moses is calling you. We have to hear that call. It's not anti-Semitism that's kept us alive, ladies and gentlemen. It's a sense of that covenant. We have a purpose. To reaffirm that covenant, that's what we're here for. That might be why some of you are here, to feel that. See, I began the story of the sermon with the story of someone who asks, could it really be Jewish? But I guess we also ask the question whether it's possible to stop being a Jew. According to the rabbis, you know this, many of you, once you're born a Jew or you convert, you're always a Jew, correct? But when Jewishness is seen only as a birthright, just an accident of birth, it's easy to lose its meaning. Perhaps that's why you're here. Perhaps that's why we're all here. Maybe the High Holy Days is our new Mount Sinai. Do you feel the sense of being covenanted in a holy purpose? Maybe that's what we're doing here at Mount Sinai. Gather together to feel the potential of a life dedicated to blessings. Reaffirm covenant of our community. That's what I pray for you this year. I pray for you the sense of oneness with community, to feel embraced by it. But more than that, to feel covenanted, to feel that you have a purpose and that you can pass that purpose on to people around you. May it be a year of community, covenant, and blessing for us all. And let us say,